I've been replaying the original Legend of Zelda recently. I'm not really sure what brought me back to it. The original two Zelda games, have a certain spirit in them that the rest of the series rarely was able to capture again. There is an ambience, a sense of adventure, a sense of mystery and achievement that is nearly wholly unique to those games. I don't mean to say that the rest of the series has nothing special, far from it. I think that barring the natural missteps, the series on a whole manages to tap into something that is incredibly rare in gaming. It's hard to pinpoint what that is exactly. It's one of those intangibles, special qualities that come together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. It may be hard to pinpoint it, but you can feel it. When you put your hands on a Zelda game, there's something about them that even the copycats and the inspired bys don't quite reach. I love this series. It's buried deep in my heart, but I'd begun to lose touch with it. I've had a bit of a rough time these last few years, and I recently realized that I really missed Zelda. I've let my Echoes of Wisdom and Tears of the Kingdom files go unfinished and stagnate, which, when it comes to Zelda, isn't like me, and I was missing that spark that Zelda once inspired. So I decided maybe I should marathon them all. There are a couple I've never gotten around to, and this could be a good opportunity to do it. I don't know yet whether a full marathon will come to fruition, but as I booted up The Legend of Zelda again and I heard the title screen and the ting of the name select input and that unforgettable first screen opened up in front of me, I knew that I had made a good choice. But before I'm really able to delve into it, I need to clarify a bit of my position on retro games, and, games as a whole, really. Nostalgia, in contemporary discussions around older media, is often used more as a cudgel than a proper descriptor. What is a deeply human experience, a bittersweet appreciation, sometimes painful yearning for the experiences of the past, has been made into a term used to shut down conversation before it even starts. It runs on a premise which implies that a person only cares about or enjoys something because it was tied to their formative years. Even worse, this thing is automatically devalued because it was tied to something from the past. As if whatever the topic is has no value beyond what it was worth when it was new and novel.
Whoa, nice graphic!
I think that approach to nostalgia is flawed, to say the least. A game, a movie, a book, a sculpture, a piece of music, whatever it may be, stands on its own and can be enjoyed, explored, deconstructed, reconstructed, and learned from at any point in history. Is a song less of a song because of the musical aesthetics of its era? Not really. Blind Willie McTell may not be to your modern tastes, shaped by your own modern experiences, but he's no less a musician with an experience to give if you'll only listen.
And all the good the poor girl done, my heart beat like a hammer, and my eyes get overloaded.
The latest video game craze to sweep the United States and Japan. It's called Nintendo.
Now you're playing with power.
When a person looks forward to a new version of something, or sings the praises of something from their past, yes, it is possible to be blinded by nostalgia. It doesn't help that game development companies like Nintendo heavily milk a pastiche of their own past to capitalize on this emotion. I think, though, that nostalgic blindness is far and away the exception and not the rule. With the countless advancements in game design, how much we have learned about player behavior and quality of life improvements over the decades, it seems to me that what's really going on is a lack of context awareness. Nostalgia itself is almost by necessity always an individual experience. And what people confuse for nostalgia goggles a lot of the time, when they aren't confusing it for just something conflicting with their personal tastes, is actually just that the person being accused of nostalgia was around a situation to have a context established in their minds for what makes something appealing, and the accuser has either forgotten or they had never had it. There are countless examples of people trying out games that were decades before they were born, falling in love with them and becoming new fans. Of course, these people are also accused of nostalgia goggles. Well, this isn't to say that every old game has aged well or anything. Definitely not. With most games being so generally accessible now, I think a crucial skill has been atrophied. It's one that is very useful beyond the realm of gaming, but for discussions around retro games is extremely important. That is the skill of meeting a game halfway. It's something you always have to do, quickly evaluate a game's expectations and limits, roll with a few punches so you don't wind up the person crying and throwing your controller because you can't just Ezio platform up the ramparts in your turn-based tactical strategy game. But most of the basics at this point have been fairly standardized, and the push to remove as much friction from the player experience as possible means you can generally jump from one third-person action game to the next with minimal adaptation time. In the past, before the lessons were learned, games were much more varied in how they each operated on their base level. We didn't have so much that had been standardized, and so come to be expected by the player. Each game played as its own experience. So much so that something as simple as jumping, attacking, or grabbing items wasn't necessarily anything like the game before or after it. So, especially when you go back to try out older games, you absolutely have to meet the game where it's at. It was expected and necessary. A lot of people refuse this and write off a game based on that friction alone, which can be a real shame. I don't ascribe to the idea that a game design can ever become outdated. It is a design. It is what it is. It's a set of mechanics, permissions, and restrictions. It plays the way it plays, with all of the emergent consequences of however many rules it may have. What you see on the screen is essentially the game's board and its pieces. We're still playing card and table games that are hundreds to thousands of years old, with newly rediscovered ancient games being revived all the time. They are allowed to sit proudly on the shelf with the best of the newest, quote, better tabletop games. But with video games, a lot of people have a strange reluctance to do this. At best, I think we can say that we figured out better ways to do certain things. UI, for instance, is astronomically better than it often used to be, provided it isn't mucking up the entire screen with pointless info and waypoints. This doesn't mean that we've made every old way obsolete, however. It's all about execution. Of course, that's not to say that certain aspects don't show their age, but the conversation as to what constitutes a game aging poorly can get pretty thick and nebulous and is beyond the scope of this video. So all that being said, the games themselves don't really age. Our expectations do. So if you're one of those people that bounces off of the original Zelda, that's perfectly fine. But if you think its only merit is given through nostalgia, then I hope now you can see where I'm coming from when I talk about the series going forward. Now, these things aren't in a vacuum, of course. Their time period and influence are integral to understanding them properly. What came before, its own impact, what came after. So, let's get my nostalgic bias out of the way. The Legend of Zelda was extremely formative for me. 3 years my senior, and plus or minus 2 more years by the time I got a hold of it. That golden cartridge felt so special. It was set apart from the other games, and the grand, melancholic, courageous sensation that the title screen invoked matched that mystique. The music, the colors, even the sound effects, everything had such a weight and a glamour to it. The sense of overcoming the trials ahead of you was intoxicating. I, of course, would just wander around, mostly lost, afraid to enter the dungeons most of the time. I was fascinated watching the adults in my life play through that game multiple times, both first and second quest, though I'm not sure any of them completed that. I learned about the Zelda name skip this way. I'd watch my parents, aunts, uncles, friends of the family all trade secrets and tips, helping each other chisel away at Hyrule's secrets until they eventually beat it. I would pore over the included map, imagining what magic and mysteries it was hiding from me. Even silly little things like the palette swaps when you would get a different tunic felt wondrous. Zelda 2 was just as big in the family and just as grand and magical to me. There's been quite a lot of revisionist history surrounding Zelda 2, and it really deserves to have its name cleared. But until I can get around to doing that, I just know for this purpose that people played both games simultaneously, and they played them a lot. It's been lost to time a little bit in the broader gaming culture. I mean, those who were there and gaming history enthusiasts won't have forgotten, but Zelda and Zelda 2 were huge event games. Absolutely massive influence and popularity, just as important as Mario was. Similar to any other massive pop cultural influence, it is incredibly difficult to properly describe what it was actually like surrounded by this stuff. Anyone who has lived through something gargantuan like the initial Pokemon craze, or a massive subcultural shift like any one of the counterculture movements in the last 70 years, can testify to this. Reading about it, watching old news spots, it can get you close to seeing the shape of it all, but not the feeling of it. Being lost in and immersed in it with an exciting and unsure future being painted as you went. That's doubly true for a kid from 2 to 6 years old, where that's all that he knows. I played this game and its sequel a lot. Terribly, but a lot. I mean, I didn't know I was being terrible, of course. I was adventuring. That's all that mattered. I didn't actually beat the game for the first time until I was about 14 or 15 in my sophomore year of high school. I had been introduced to emulators in the 8th grade by my best friend, and my mind was blown that this was even possible. I quickly got just as proficient at using a keyboard as a controller to play these games. Cherry ROMs was a frequent stop whenever I was allowed to use the internet on my trusty Windows 98 e-machine. I explored the entire Super Nintendo library this way. Well, naturally, that branched out to NES games before long. The original Zelda was definitely included in that. Of course, now you may be thinking that my first time beating The Legend of Zelda was because of the existence of save states, but you'd be wrong, because despite falling in love with emulators, I still used them the same way I would have used the real NES when I was younger, by bopping between a pile of different games, constantly trying out the entire world of experiences I either missed or didn't know existed. I wouldn't actually commit to a game through an emulator the way I would a real version of the game for a long while yet. The novelty was too strong. No, my escapades playing Zelda on Nesticle allowed me to get far more familiar with it than when I was little, but never enough to bother beating it. That came during my high school years, when I was visiting a cousin's house and noticed a familiar looking set of icons on their family's desktop. Zelda Classic? Z-Quest? What in the world? So mind you, by now, through the original 2, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, this series had solidified itself into the deepest level of my psyche. I'd lose myself for hours on the Odyssey of Hyrule, Zelda Dungeon, and the Zelda Universe forums. I was a Zelda nerd through and through. To see this icon and not know at all what it could be intrigued me to no end. I had to know, but I couldn't just hop on their computer and start clicking things. So it burned my brain for the rest of the day and the long drive home and all through the night. I couldn't let it go. The first chance I got, I hit Yahoo and Google trying to find out whatever this was. And as I recall, at the time it took a little bit of doing, but before long I stumbled on it. Zelda Classic is a fan recreation of the original Legend of Zelda. It is remarkably accurate, indistinguishable from the original. It's a perfect recreation. One of the things that really made Zelda Classic special was it had a custom quest editor, and it had a thriving community of people making some of the most creative quests you could imagine. These would often include custom items, tile sets, music, scripting. It was through this fan replica that I first completed both quests, believe it or not. I would then go on to spend many sleepless nights working on my own quests until the sun would surprise me by rising. In doing so, I became intimately familiar with the ins and outs of how this game functions, only to realize during this current playthrough how rusty I am on this knowledge today. None of my quests ever saw any players other than myself. In fact, I'm not sure if I ever finished any of them. I just loved making them. Zelda Classic still exists, the website is still up, and hundreds of quests available for download, with more out there and other places on the internet. Naturally, as time has passed, that community has slowed to a crawl. Their latest forum post dated in 2025, with the years steeply falling further into the past for each post before that. If you're a fan of the original Zelda, or even just curious, and you don't mind a tiny bit of elbow grease to get things loaded, I highly recommend checking it out. It is well worth the experience. In the years since, I have beaten both quests on an emulator, and the first quest on original hardware. This is disregarding all the times I would boot it up and just go however far I felt like at the time. My point here is that I have a long history with this series and the original game in particular. I am not immune to the nostalgic siren's call. So I suppose you can think of this as an extended disclosure of my biases. In the interest of accuracy and fairness, I felt like I needed to cover this context because in the coming videos, I do want to dive a little more deeply into the actual games. Zelda has had its ups and downs, as any series has, and eventually the lows reached a breaking point, resulting in the necessity, yes, necessity, of the creation of Breath of the Wild. Little by little, bit by bit, as each new game would release, more and more fans would feel left behind or forgotten by this or that aspect of the series. The series began to forget what made it special, what inspired such excitement. I'll save my views on the rundown of the history of the entire series for later, because that is an intricately interconnected web of development history, design philosophy, in-game lore, promises made, promises failed, promises kept, fandom expectations, fandom reactions. But regardless of how we got there, by the time Skyward Sword released, I don't think there was a single longtime Zelda fan who didn't feel this shift, this thinning spirit in some form, even if they couldn't explain what it was that felt off. Playing through the first game again, after all this time, with the entire weight of my own life and the context of the entire series behind it now, I have been very pleasantly surprised that it wasn't just nostalgia and the loss of that sense of spark. It wasn't just me growing away from it. The same spark I had been craving is still there, deep in the purest DNA of the series. I can confidently say that yes, something shifted over the years, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Zelda currently is in an awkward spot. It is simultaneously more successful and beloved than it has been in eons, and extremely divided. So aside from just having fun with a marathon, one of my hopes is that by running back through the series from the start with a more deliberate eye, I'll be able to hang on to that original thread and follow it through the decades and see the ways it thrived and the ways it only just survived. Until then, if you are one of those people that immediately shouts nostalgia at someone for preferring an older title to a newer one, when you feel the urge to do it again, take a breath and ask yourself, is it really that simple? Or perhaps does that older game provide something that the newer one is missing.